We're pleased to be joined by Kevin Cronin. He is a principal over at Fortaris Capital Advisors. Kevin, thank you for being with us today.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for having me.
Appreciate having you on. How are you? How's your team over at Fortaris Capital Advisors doing?
We are doing great. We are navigating these COVID waters, and we're helping clients get through it.
So yeah, let's touch a little bit on that. It's a tough time, especially for business owners and for a lot of their employees as well as they are off of work. What is your team working on or have been focusing on with your clients to keep them in as best financial standing as they possibly can be, despite the treacherous financial times caused by COVID-19?
Yeah, thank you. So Fortaris Capital Advisors, we're a full-service risk management and financial advisory firm. We focus on, when I say risk management, that's anything that affects revenue or potentially affects revenue. So what we're working with our clients on is threat and risk assessments. How do you reopen after COVID-19? What threats and what risks does each company face? And to each company, it's unique. We come in and we'll work with our clients to put together a plan. First, we identify those pitfalls of the company, and then we put together a plan to help them navigate these waters. And every industry, every profession is a little bit different. So we recommend starting off with a very robust threat and risk assessment, and then we look at putting together crisis management plans. And on those crisis management plans, we look at everything from not just finances, but we look at security and any potential risks to operations or supply chain, anything that would affect the employees or the customers of the company. We recommend right now, most people are working from home, so we highly encourage everybody to review their cybersecurity platform. What policies do they have in place to ensure that their data, the customer's data, and the employee's data is all protected? We also want to look at if you're part of the PPP program, make sure you're compliant with all of those, just to make sure you stay compliant with the company and with the government on those loans.
So you also mentioned about security. I would imagine as more and more employees are working at home, for those businesses that have a brick and mortar location, are you finding that there are more break-ins or that their building is vulnerable to theft as well?
Absolutely. And this really goes back to the civil unrest that we're seeing across the country right now. We have a lot of clients that are, they own brick and mortar or they're leasing brick and mortar locations, but they don't have employees in there per se. You see a lot of looting, vandalism, and stuff like that going on around the country. With those, there's steps to put in place to safeguard your property there. So when I talk about a security and risk a security risk and threat assessment, we're talking about the security of the company. If they're working here in the United States, but they have offices abroad, are those protected over there? Do they have good intelligence of what's actually happening on the ground? Do they have good intelligence of what's happening in each region where they're located?
Kevin Cronin with us. He's the principal over at Fortaris Capital Advisors with us on the Oakland County Megacast. So for individuals, what should they be looking at right now as we're 5 months into the pandemic? It seems like it's going to continue on through the remainder of the year, maybe even early on into 2021 financially and from a security standpoint also. What should individuals, maybe that aren't business owners, that are just regular people like Ronnie and I, what should we be looking out for financially as we're heading into even more unknown going forward?
Well, the big thing you have to do is you have to plan with your expectations to align with reality, right? So I would recommend a conservative approach on investing and spending money. And when you look at your expenses, I look at it two ways. You have an expense and then you have an investment. Expenses are controlled or hopefully controlled, and investments are something that are going to pay off dividends in the future. Right now, even on a personal basis, when you're looking at your finances, I would recommend being more conservative on what you're spending right now. protect your cash on hand. We don't know how long this is going to take. This could end November 4th. This may go on for another year until after the vaccine. I believe it's going to be somewhere in between there. But a conservative approach moving forward is, I think, the right steps to go. Along those lines, I would also have a contingency plan in place to where if something happens, we can quickly pivot in one direction or another to answer those pitfalls that we may find ourselves in.
Kevin Cronin with us. He is a principal over at Fortaris Capital Advisors with us on the Oakland County Megacast. So in your industry, how have things changed over the course of the pandemic? Everything's been modified and people have had to pivot and people have had to make changes to how they operate. I'm sure that's still also the case in terms of financial advisors and capital advisors, such as your team over at Fortaris.
Absolutely. You know, the COVID-19 has given us a lot of challenges, but it's also provided a lot of opportunities. And the key is to identify those opportunities and to capitalize on them. Business today is different than it was a year ago, different than it was back in January or February of 2020. You know, more people are working remote. There's a lot of unemployment. People are out of the jobs that they were holding, you know, comfortable C-suite jobs all the way down to your small mom and pop businesses. And so with those positions being eliminated, it does create opportunity to pivot in a new direction, a new career path. You know, I have friends and colleagues that have been affected by unemployment, and they've pivoted into a completely different career, and they're happy. And I think working at home, it's either really good for you or it's really bad for you. And I think that depends on your personality and what you're used to and what your home situation is, and if you're set up to have a remote work office and the type of work you do. If you're in the service section or service industry, you know, that's hard. You can't necessarily work from home. On your previous guest that runs the bowling alleys, you can't bowl in a parking lot or from your home. You have to go to one of those facilities to do that. So those are challenges, obviously. But what we'd like to do is help our clients find opportunities and make lemonade out of lemons.
So I think that's a good advice for everyone. What do you think, from your standpoint, is going to be the long-term impact of this pandemic for a majority of your clients?
You know, right now, revenue is going to be down pretty much across the board in every industry for 2020. Hopefully, you had good pre-planning in the beginning of, the previous years, and you have cash on hand, and hopefully you have contingency plans to where you can survive opening up at 50% or 30%. But 2020 is going to be a challenging year. We're going to see a lot of businesses go out of business because they don't have the cash on hand and they're not able to continue to make their expenses. Going forward, you'll also see new businesses and people finding those opportunities and capitalizing on those. So I'm hoping 2021 turns out to be a much better year for all of us than 2020. There's going to be challenges that are going to last through the years. And they may last 5 or 10 years to recover from. A lot of businesses are scaling back. Every day you're reading in the Wall Street Journal that, somebody just cut another 250 employees. For every 250 employees that are cut, that goes back to families. It goes back to paying for their sports, their kids' sports, and their kids' tuition, and what they would consider their normal lifestyle drastically changes.
Kevin, for those who are now 5 months into the pandemic, maybe they've continued to work on and off or are now back full time with industries reopening, or maybe it's somebody that has been out of work and been on unemployment and has lost that extra federal benefit, and they're starting their process of planning and risk managing their funds now. What are the first several steps that they should be taking in that process to put their best foot forward and get the ball rolling, albeit better late than never?
So right now, if you have debt, I would check with your creditors. And there's programs in place to help people through the COVID pandemic. Banks, car loans, mortgages, they're deferring a lot of those payments. So the first thing I would say is have a budget, know exactly what your budget is, and be able to account for every dollar that's coming in and out. Um, and what I would suggest is talking to your creditors if you're maintaining debt, and see if you can get a relief on that debt. And there's companies out there that can help individuals do that. That's the first step. And then the second step, I would say, is to make sure that you have a plan going forward, right? And attack that plan every day with enthusiasm and urgency to try to execute that plan, especially when people are moving into a new market or moving into a new career path, right? It's going to push people out of their comfort zone, but that's okay. A lot of times when people get pushed out of their comfort zone, it's because there's something better down the line waiting for them anyhow. They may not realize it at the time, and that stresses everybody out. Stress is from work, and stress is from losing money or income. It doesn't just affect the individual, it affects the entire family.
So, Kevin, I'm looking at your LinkedIn page. You have a very diverse background. One of the things, you're an expert and you help company in investigations of like loss prevention, trade secrets, data, intellectual property, and product distribution, as well as fraud. When we're in the middle of a pandemic, people tend to lose focus. So do you anticipate we're going to see more of these issues come up for these companies because they're so busy focusing on the crisis of COVID-19 that it makes them more vulnerable to fraud and some of these other security issues?
100%, absolutely. The Gartner report just came out, and it showed that just during the COVID-19, frauds increased 200%. I mean, think of that, 200%. And then what I would ask a company is, do they know what their total cost of fraud is? And when I say total cost of fraud, it's not just how many dollars you lost in a fraudulent deal or transaction or theft, internal or external. It's more of what's the total cost of fraud. And what we'll calculate in that number is your amount of labor hours. What did it cost you in time? What did it cost you in attorney's fees? What's the total cost? And it usually comes out to be about $2.30 to every dollar that you've lost. So the total cost of fraud is much more than what the actual dollar amount is on the books.
Kevin, just another couple minutes with you. Any lasting advice for people that are tuning in now, for business owners that are tuning in now that are trying to put their best foot forward and battle through the remainder of this pandemic, no matter how long it may go on?
Yeah, I would say focus on the top line, right? And make sure that to have a strong bottom line, you got to focus on the top line. You look at what your expenses are, and then you manage that against your, what you consider an expense and what you consider an investment. Right now, if you're going to open during COVID-19 or get back to work during COVID-19, highly recommend a robust threat and risk assessment. With that would be a contingency plans to put into place, due diligence. Make sure you know if you're hiring new people, make sure you know who the people are. Do a deep dive background checks. And that depends on what position that they're applying for. But I would do a background check on everybody. And I would look at, not just their professional, but look at their personal life, their social media. Make sure that their values align with your values of your company. And then just make sure you reevaluate your cybersecurity policy and make sure you have one in place. Make sure everyone that's working remote, and if they're logging in, make sure that they're doing that according to your guidelines.
Well, Kevin, we thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.